Marcus Rodriguez was 52 years old when he returned to Pine Ridge, Colorado, to settle the estate his grandfather built more than 60 years earlier. The property covered 3 quiet acres on the upper ridge, surrounded by ponderosa pine and mountain grass. It had been in his family since 1962, when Miguel Rodriguez, a first-generation homesteader and self-taught builder, carved it out of the wilderness with his own hands. Miguel built the small cabin, the stone workshop, and most importantly, a spring-fed pond designed to capture mountain runoff and prevent flooding in the valley below. The pond became both a practical and personal landmark, an engineered retention system that kept downstream communities safe while offering beauty and calm at the heart of the property. Over time, the pond's steady presence shaped the landscape and the family that maintained it. Its clear water reflected the changing seasons and provided a sense of order amid the rugged terrain. For Miguel, it was proof that nature and engineering could coexist. For his grandson, it became something deeper. Marcus grew up visiting the property every summer, later pursuing a career with the Army Corps of Engineers, where he spent 25 years designing flood control systems around the country. When he inherited the land following his wife Sarah's passing, the property became both memorial and refuge. He scattered her ashes by the pond, among the wildflowers she had once planted along the water's edge. The legal history of the land was as solid as its stone foundation. The 1962 deed included perpetual spring water rights and mineral access that existed long before any homeowners association was formed. For decades, the property remained outside community control, recognized by the county as an independent homestead. But Pine Ridge changed. As nearby land was sold and developed, new residents arrived. People drawn by mountain views but governed by uniformity. In time, the Pine Ridge Estates HOA emerged, bringing new regulations, architectural standards, and the belief that even long-established properties must conform to modern rules. When Marcus returned to restore his grandfather's cabin, he found a different landscape. What had once been open mountain country had become a managed subdivision, and soon, that difference would define the battle ahead. The dispute began on an ordinary morning when Marcus Rodriguez noticed a white Tesla easing up his gravel drive, its tires crunching across the stones his grandfather once spread by hand. From the car stepped Cordelia Blackstone, president of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. She was impeccably assembled, a charcoal gray business suit, platinum blonde hair cut with geometric precision, and a leather portfolio clasped beneath one arm. Without greeting, she announced that the pond behind Marcus's cabin violated the community's new water management regulations. Her tone was polished yet absolute, the kind used by people who expect instant compliance. Marcus listened quietly while she read from the printed notice. The document cited unauthorized water hoarding, an offense carrying mandatory removal of the structure within 30 days. Cordelia explained that the rule had been passed 6 months earlier to ensure equitable resource use within the subdivision. When Marcus replied that his pond predated the neighborhood by decades, she dismissed the point, saying that all existing installations must conform to current community standards. He invited her to view the spring itself, the narrow channel Miguel Rodriguez had engineered in 1962 to redirect mountain runoff and prevent flooding downstream. Cordelia declined, insisting the decision was administrative, not technical. Marcus noted that the regulation carried the signature of her husband, Councilman Bradley Blackstone, whose real estate interests were well known in the area. During the weeks he had spent arranging his wife Sarah's memorial, Bradley had convened an emergency session of the HOA board, pushing through the water rule with limited notice and no homeowner vote. The exchange remained civil but cold. Marcus, an engineer by training, understood that compliance deadlines often signaled the start of larger pressure campaigns. He requested written evidence of the HOA's jurisdiction over his grandfather's pond. Cordelia promised to forward the relevant clauses and departed in a cloud of dust and perfume. That afternoon, Marcus read the violation again beneath the quiet sound of running water. The language was unmistakable. Failure to remove the pond would incur escalating fines and potential liens against the property. What had begun as a courtesy visit had introduced a challenge to both heritage and law. From that moment, Marcus Rodriguez recognized that defending his family's land would require the same precision and patience that once guided his work in flood control. 3 days after Cordelia Blackstone's initial visit, a second vehicle appeared at Marcus Rodriguez's property, an aging Honda Civic with a magnetic sign reading, "Water Usage Inspector." From it emerged a thin young man in a wrinkled polo shirt, clutching a clipboard and laminated badge that still smelled of printer ink. Cordelia followed in her Tesla, heels sinking slightly into the soft gravel as she introduced him. "Mr. Rodriguez, this is Derek Blackstone, our certified water inspector. He's here to conduct an assessment of your non-compliant pond." The surname made the connection clear. Derek was family, a relative enlisted to create the illusion of oversight. Marcus, drawing on years of experience with legitimate federal inspectors, immediately recognized the inconsistencies. Certified agents arrived in government-marked vehicles, used calibrated testing equipment, and carried verified credentials. Derek carried a wooden yardstick, a camera phone, and nervous energy. He began taking photographs from random angles, occasionally dipping the yardstick into the shallows, muttering measurements that had no reference points. When asked for his authorization number, Derek hesitated, claiming his credentials were registered with the regional office. Marcus offered to call the office for verification, prompting visible discomfort. Cordelia intervened, declaring the inspection preliminary. The process lasted less than an hour. Before leaving, Derek handed Cordelia a handwritten summary citing excessive water retention and potential stagnation risks. By that evening, a formal violation notice appeared on Marcus's door. The document referenced Derek's findings and listed a $5,000 fine for unauthorized use of community resources. The language accused him of diverting water belonging to Pine Ridge Estates homeowners. Marcus reviewed the papers carefully. The HOA's claim hinged on authority it did not possess and on an inspection that failed every procedural standard. He documented the encounter, photographing the vehicles, recording the time, and saving the notice. His years in the Army Corps had taught him that manufactured compliance cases depended on precision. Their own paperwork could become evidence against them. That night, as he sat near the pond listening to the steady flow from the spring, Marcus understood the strategy now unfolding. Cordelia was not enforcing policy. She was building a case. The inspection had nothing to do with water quality and everything to do with ownership. Within a week of the so-called inspection, the dispute between Marcus Rodriguez and the Pine Ridge Estates HOA moved from paperwork to public opinion. On a Saturday morning, Marcus's neighbor Frank handed him a copy of the Pine Ridge Gazette. Across the front page, a headline read, "Local resident hoards water while neighbors face drought conditions." Beneath it, a photo of Marcus's pond appeared dark and muddy, cropped to hide the clear inflow from the spring. The article described the property as a stagnant health hazard, quoting anonymous residents who claimed to be worried for their children's safety. The story had all the hallmarks of orchestration. Cordelia Blackstone was cited as a community representative, praising the HOA for taking decisive action to protect shared resources. There was no mention of the pond's historical function or its legal independence from the subdivision. The implication was clear. Marcus was the selfish outsider threatening the well-being of a modern community. As copies circulated, the effect was immediate. Neighbors who once waved from their driveways now turned away. At the local grocery, Marcus overheard whispers about the man stealing water. Even casual acquaintances began treating him with polite distance. It was a familiar tactic: isolate the target, redefine the narrative, and let rumor do the rest. Rather than react publicly, Marcus focused on documentation. He saved copies of the newspaper, screenshots of online comments, and notes on the timing of each publication. Years of government work had taught him that defamation often traveled faster than evidence, but left a traceable trail. Meanwhile, Cordelia's allies cited the article at HOA meetings as proof of community concern, reinforcing the fines and further restricting his access to the property. The shift from regulation to reputation marked a new phase of control. Marcus recognized the campaign as deliberate, an attempt to weaken his credibility before he could challenge the legality of their claims. Late that evening, under the fading light of the mountains, he began organizing his next step. Instead of engaging in public argument, he would turn to the records themselves. If the HOA intended to fight through paperwork, he would find his defense in the documents that defined the land long before Pine Ridge Estates existed. Marcus Rodriguez arrived at the county courthouse the following Monday with a folder of violation notices and a single purpose: to confirm, through record, what he already knew in principle. The clerk led him to a row of steel cabinets where property deeds dating back to the 1950s were kept in climate-controlled drawers. After several hours of cross-referencing plat maps and survey records, he located the original 1962 deed for his grandfather's parcel. The language was concise but decisive. It granted Miguel Rodriguez and his heirs perpetual rights to the spring, surface water, and mineral resources beneath the property. Those rights were recorded decades before Pine Ridge Estates or its homeowners association existed. Marcus requested certified copies and reviewed the legal descriptions line by line. The document established that the water source was private, originating from a natural spring within his boundary, not diverted from any shared supply. Under Colorado water law, that clause rendered the HOA's jurisdiction invalid. Every regulation they cited applied only to community-managed systems. His grandfather's pond, by definition, was an independent flood control basin built under lawful authority. Knowing the implications, Marcus contacted his old colleague and friend, Jake Thornfield, a former Army Corps engineer who had since become an environmental attorney. After reviewing the deed and associated filings, Jake confirmed its significance. "This isn't a gray area," he told Marcus over the phone. "These rights are permanent. They predate every statute the HOA is trying to enforce." Further research uncovered a broader motive. Jake traced ownership and council records linking Cordelia's husband, Bradley Blackstone, to a development company called Mountain Vista Development LLC. The firm specialized in acquiring distressed properties, particularly those with natural water access. Bradley's signature appeared on the new HOA regulations, suggesting a coordinated effort to devalue certain parcels before purchasing them. Marcus understood now that the violation notices and newspaper attacks were not random acts of enforcement, but part of a planned expansion strategy. The discovery shifted his role from a defensive homeowner to a documented rights holder confronting organized misuse of authority. With the deed secured and the motive revealed, the next step would be to prepare for a legal countermeasure strong enough to expose the pattern behind the pressure. The Pine Ridge Estates. HOA escalated its actions shortly after Marcus Rodriguez's discovery of the original deed. At the following board meeting, Cordelia Blackstone presented what she described as independent laboratory results, confirming bacterial contamination in Marcus's pond. Projected on a screen were photographs of cloudy water and floating debris, images that bore little resemblance to the clear spring-fed basin behind Marcus's cabin. She announced that the HOA had no choice but to increase his fine to $15,000 and issue a safety restriction preventing him from approaching the pond until remediation was complete. The vote passed unanimously among board members, many of whom had purchased homes from Cordelia's husband's development firm. Marcus, maintaining composure, recognized the pattern of escalation. He had seen similar tactics used against property owners during federal disputes. Create an environmental pretext, document falsified evidence, and use procedure to justify seizure. That night, he installed a dozen motion-triggered trail cameras around his property. Years of engineering fieldwork had taught him how to position them discreetly, covering the pond, the access road, and the tree line bordering the subdivision. 2 nights later, the cameras recorded their first visitors. At 2:17 a.m., Derek Blackstone appeared carrying a plastic bucket. He knelt near the pond and dumped its contents, several dead fish, into the shallow water, then photographed the scene under bright LED lights. Marcus watched the footage the next morning in disbelief. A second recording, taken an hour later, captured Bradley Blackstone walking the perimeter with 2 men in hard hats, discussing measurements and pointing at survey markers near the waterline. The evidence was undeniable. The contamination had been staged, and construction planning was already underway on property the HOA was attempting to claim. Marcus printed the footage stills, stored backups on encrypted drives, and began contacting neighbors who had reported similar experiences. When they compared notices, the pattern was unmistakable. Every longtime resident had been targeted with sudden code violations, while newer homeowners associated with the Blackstones were exempt. What had begun as an individual dispute was now confirmed as coordinated misconduct. With proof of trespassing and evidence tampering in hand, Marcus prepared to turn defense into collective action. The discovery of coordinated misconduct marked a turning point in the conflict between Marcus Rodriguez and the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. What began as a personal struggle now revealed systemic abuse targeting every long-standing resident whose property carried independent rights or valuable positioning. The footage Marcus captured of Derek and Bradley Blackstone trespassing and fabricating contamination transformed the matter from neighborhood politics into evidence-based exposure. Marcus understood the importance of collective action. Isolated, homeowners could be outmaneuvered, but a unified community could not easily be silenced. He began by inviting several trusted neighbors to his cabin for a meeting. Frank and Ruth Henderson, who had farmed the same parcel since the early 1980s, brought folders of violation notices citing unapproved landscape modifications. Pete Morrison, a retired forest ranger, arrived with copies of correspondence he had received accusing him of unauthorized agricultural activity. Each notice bore identical formatting, language, and signatures, all referencing the new water management ordinance that had never been lawfully adopted. Over coffee and carefully organized paperwork, the residents realized that their individual battles were fragments of a larger campaign. They decided that evening to formalize their response. Drawing from his background in the Army Corps of Engineers, Marcus proposed a structure modeled after project command frameworks, roles, documentation procedures, and operational logs. Thus, the Pine Ridge Heritage Committee was born. Its charter declared a mission to preserve historical properties, challenge selective enforcement, and demand transparency in community governance. Marcus was appointed coordinator. Frank served as president, Ruth handled administrative records, and Pete managed archival research. The committee's first objective was evidence consolidation. Marcus developed a shared database tracking every citation issued by the HOA during the previous 2 years. Patterns emerged quickly. Older residents accounted for 100% of the fines, while recently arrived homeowners, many connected to Mountain Vista development, showed none. Jake Thornfield joined as the group's legal representative, drafting letters to county officials and filing preliminary motions alleging harassment and discrimination. At the same time, Marcus contacted Dr. Maria Santos, a hydrologist at Colorado State University. Using professional-grade equipment, she tested the pond and nearby wells. Her official report confirmed what Marcus already suspected. The water was clean, stable, and ecologically beneficial. The document carried state certification and dismantled every claim of contamination the HOA had advanced. Word of the Heritage Committee spread across Pine Ridge. Within 3 weeks, membership expanded from a handful of neighbors to more than a dozen families. The group met weekly, recording minutes, voting on initiatives, and operating with transparency that sharply contrasted the secrecy of the HOA board. What had once been an informal gathering around a kitchen table evolved into a structured civic body, prepared to defend not only Marcus's pond but the principles of fairness and due process. For Marcus, it was no longer simply about protecting his grandfather's work. It was about restoring integrity to a community that had forgotten what the word neighbor truly meant. The turning point in the Pine Ridge dispute arrived when Marcus Rodriguez uncovered the subdivision's original founding documents. While reviewing county archives for evidence of early property agreements, he located a folder labeled Pine Ridge Estates, Corporate Charter 1987. The document, yellowed from age but intact, contained clauses that dramatically altered the legal landscape. Section 12A stated that any modification to community water systems required unanimous homeowner consent. Not a majority vote, not a board decision, but full agreement of every property owner. This meant that the water regulations Cordelia and Bradley Blackstone had introduced 6 months earlier were procedurally invalid from inception. Further examination revealed another clause of even greater significance. Section 12C identified the Rodriguez property as the community's primary natural flood management system, citing its spring-fed pond as essential to regional drainage stability. The clause described the feature as protected infrastructure, established long before the HOA's incorporation. In effect, the pond Marcus inherited was not merely private. It was officially recognized as critical environmental infrastructure whose removal could endanger downstream properties. Marcus immediately shared copies with attorney Jake Thornfield, who verified their authenticity and filed a motion for injunction citing breach of charter authority. His accompanying legal memorandum argued that every fine, citation, and enforcement action derived from an unlawful amendment. The discovery also exposed another layer of misconduct. State corporate records showed the HOA's registration had lapsed 2 years earlier, rendering it inactive and unable to levy penalties or represent itself legally. At the same time, Jake cross-referenced federal flood control records and discovered that the Army Corps of Engineers had included the Pine Ridge watershed, including the Rodriguez Pond, in a 1981 regional hydrology survey. Under federal law, any interference with designated flood control infrastructure required federal authorization. Tampering without it could constitute a criminal violation. The implications were profound. Cordelia and Bradley had not only violated their own bylaws but potentially committed federal offenses. For Marcus, the revelation confirmed that his family's pond was more than heritage. It was protected engineering, serving both history and public safety. What began as an HOA dispute had now evolved into a case with state and federal dimensions, where local authority no longer held control. Marcus immediately shared copies with attorney Jake Thornfield, who verified their authenticity and filed a motion for injunction citing breach of charter authority. His accompanying legal memorandum argued that every fine, citation, and enforcement action derived from an unlawful amendment. The discovery also exposed another layer of misconduct. State corporate records showed the HOA's registration had lapsed 2 years earlier, rendering it inactive and unable to levy penalties or represent itself legally. At the same time, Jake cross-referenced federal flood control records and discovered that the Army Corps of Engineers had included the Pine Ridge watershed, including the Rodriguez Pond, in a 1981 regional hydrology survey. Under federal law, any interference with designated flood control infrastructure required federal authorization. Tampering without it could constitute a criminal violation. The implications were profound. Cordelia and Bradley had not only violated their own bylaws, but potentially committed federal offenses. For Marcus, the revelation confirmed that his family's pond was more than heritage. It was protected engineering, serving both history and public safety. What began as an HOA dispute had now evolved into a case with state and federal dimensions, where local authority no longer held control. The final stage of the Pine Ridge dispute unfolded rapidly once state and federal investigators became involved. In a last attempt to assert control, Cordelia Blackstone obtained an emergency court order claiming Marcus Rodriguez's pond posed an imminent health threat. The order authorized immediate drainage under county supervision. On a cold November morning, pump trucks arrived at the property accompanied by a sheriff's deputy and HOA representatives. Marcus complied outwardly, allowing the process to proceed while quietly notifying the Army Corps of Engineers that federally documented flood control infrastructure was being disturbed without authorization. Within 48 hours, the consequences became unavoidable. A Pacific storm system struck the region, producing record rainfall. Without the pond's retention capacity, Pine Ridge's drainage channels overflowed, sending water coursing through streets and basements. The HOA's million-dollar subdivision suffered extensive flooding, while Marcus's elevated property remained intact. Local news stations broadcast footage of the event, contrasting his dry workshop with submerged HOA properties. The disaster turned public perception decisively. During a televised town hall convened days later, Marcus presented the full record, the 1962 deed, the 1987 charter clauses, the federal hydrology survey, and photographic proof of falsified contamination. As reporters documented the proceedings, FBI agents entered the room and served warrants on Cordelia and Bradley Blackstone for conspiracy, bribery, and interference with federal infrastructure. Their arrest signaled the collapse of the operation that had targeted multiple homeowners across the region. The aftermath reshaped Pine Ridge. The community voted to dissolve the existing HOA, replacing it with an independent historical preservation district. Under Marcus's guidance, residents rebuilt the pond, restoring its stonework and installing educational signage recognizing it as the Sarah Rodriguez Memorial Pond. Settlement funds from federal restitution created a scholarship for environmental engineering students at Colorado State University. 6 months later, the pond once again reflected clear mountain light, its flow steady and untroubled. Formerly divided neighbors worked together on maintenance crews and flood prevention projects. The case became a state reference example for reforming HOA accountability. For Marcus, the outcome represented more than vindication. Standing beside the water that had defended itself through physics and fact, he found quiet closure. The land, like truth, had endured.